And on that cheery note, my friends, we find ourselves on Kaf Gimel Amid Aleph 23a. It's like, I don't know if you ever heard that song. It's a Pia, it's a Kadyasin Yisrael. It says, Kadyasin Yisrael, it says, Meshach Mitzar Dilhon Va'askim Bechev V'sadili. So it says
Rabbi,
that.
23A? Forgive me. I thought we were
Oh, sorry,
22B.
22b, 22b. We get to 23a. I was speaking aspirationally. Uh, we will be there soon, God willing. But it says in the Pia de Mishtachin, Sarah Delhon, they forget their own Saras, the Askin Beched Basadili, and they involve themselves in my precious thing in the Torah. So hopefully this should give us some escapism. All right. We find ourselves at Chuf Beis on base on 22b. We are up to the words Uchetzilasa Meruba Mechamasa Kshera. So this is two dots. It should very clearly be delineated in the art scrolls if you're using it, or whatever Gemara you're using. It's a new section. So in our Mishnah, it told us something that may sound familiar from the first Mishnah in the Masechta, which is that when there is a majority of shade, then it is kosher. What's the implication? Haki hadadi psula. The implication is, but if you don't have a majority of shade, if you have only 50-50, then the sukkah would be puzzle. However, v'hatnan be'idach pirkin. Don't see that every day. But didn't we learn in the previous chapter, right, in the first Mishnah, that when you have a majority of shade, the sukkah is puzzle, which what's the inference we can draw from there? Haki hadadi shera. That means 50-50 would be kosher. So we have conflicting implications from the first Mishnah of Masechta and our current Mishnah right now about whether 50-50 is kosher or puzzle. So what is the resolution in the Gemara? Lo kasha. I have to give shir right now, sweetie, but I'll play with you soon. If you go to bed, I just have to teach, okay? Everything okay? Okay. Okay. Oh, you got bath time, Ty. Okay, thank you, everyone. So the resolution is lo kasha, kamila mala, kamila mata. So the difference is, are we talking about 50-50 on top or 50-50 below? What do I mean by this? We'll explain according to Rashi, and then we'll go on a field trip and we'll learn Tosfos. So Amra Papa, behind Amra Inchi, just like what people say, kizuz il and istar tachas, like a zuz coin on the top and an istara on the bottom. I have a question, guys. What's bigger, a zuz or istara? Well, if you don't know, don't worry, because apparently it's debated between Rashi and Tosfos. So we're not the only ones who have some ambiguity on this matter. But let's explain the Gemara according to Rashi, and then I'll explain according to Tosfos. According to Rashi, we're not so much concerned with the schach itself. We're concerned with the result that the schach produces. When you are below on the ground, you need 50% shade at very least. But the thing is, if you look on top and you have 50% schach and 50% air space between them, 50-50, then the way light works is that the light is going to expand outward. And so you don't actually have 50-50 on the bottom, because since the light spreads out, 50-50 on top would not be sufficient. Toby.
How do you know, though? I mean, what's on top you can measure, you can see it's fixed. But as the day goes on, as the weather changes, it could be cloudy, it could be different, from 1 hour to the next.
Yeah, the way I think we generally assess it is if you imagine the sun is out and it's right above the sukkah, what would it produce? That's basically the scenario we usually use to assess it. Imagine the sun on a clear day is right over the sukkah. What's it going to look like? So Rashi.
But if the reality is different, that doesn't matter.
Well, I think the test case is the most most extreme case against us, against koshering the sukkah, making the sukkah kosher. So any other alternative scenario, there will only be less sunlight in the sukkah, because I think the way we assess it is on a sunny day. So we are looking at the worst possible scenario vis-a-vis the kashrus of the sukkah and asking on a very sunny day, what will it look like on the bottom? And if it passes on a very sunny day, then any other scenario, it only gets better, right? So
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what if you never get a chance to test it? Like, what if it's raining when you're building the sukkah? It's raining I mean, like
it's a good
no sun.
question. So according to Rashi, I mean, what we do know from here is that 50-50 isn't kosher. But it leaves an interesting question open. If for Rashi's interpretation of the Gemara, it's not so much about the schach as in as much as the shade that the schach produces. Well, even if you have 51% schach, I don't know, maybe 51% isn't good enough because maybe you'll have more than 50-50, and maybe that's true according to Rashi. If we take Rashi's logical conclusion, maybe I don't know. I don't know the precise numbers. Maybe I need 60% schach on top to produce 50-50 on the bottom. But basically, for Rashi's point of view, the point is, what does it look like on the floor where I'm sitting, not what does it look like on top. And so the way Rashi reads the Gemara is that a zuzah is smaller than an istara. So a zuzah is like it looks like a small coin up there, but by the time it comes down, it's a bigger coin. That's Rashi's read. Tosfos has a completely different take on it. Tosfos has two questions against Rashi's interpretation. This is Tosfos Dibra Maslo Kazuza Melchil Kisr Takas. Question number one Tosfos raises is that if you look at the Amor in the Gemara, who is it? Who's the rabbi over here who's explaining this to us? Rav
Papa.
Very good, Toby. Now, Rav Papa, Tosfos points out, the very same Rav Papa who's telling us this halacha here, that 50-50 is not good enough, he is the same Rav Papa in Meseches Eruvin on Tesvav Amid Beis, who tells us that in Dine Eruvin, which for the millionth time we are drawing analogies to Eruvin, Paretz Ka'omed, when you have 50-50 of Mechitza versus airspace, 50-50 is sufficient. So how can it be that the same Rav Papa who says in Eruvin, which we know the halachos are often analogous, says 50-50 is good, can tell us that 50-50 for schach is not good enough? There's an inconsistency in Rav Papa here. That's question number one. Question number two is Tosfos quotes a Gemara in Kiddushin, Yud Aleph on the base, which basically just the point that they extract is that an istara is actually smaller than a zuzah. So how does that analogy work? That it's like a zuz on the top, which is small, and an istara on the bottom. Actually, a zuz is bigger than an istara. So how do we make sense of this Gemara? Tosfos says. So this is the answer Tosfos gives. If you want to look inside, you're welcome to follow me. It's Dibor Hamaslo Kizuzim in the Isra Miatachas. We're smack in the middle of Tosfos in the Farish Rabbeinu Tam. I summarized the questions outside. Now we'll look inside. The Farish Rabbeinu Tam. It's not actually, see, in Rashi's scenario, you were always standing on ground level. Tosfos discusses, what if I assess, I could be in one of two places. I could be on ground level, like Rashi is. Or what does Milmala mean? Milmala means when I am on a ladder looking directly at the sky. For Tosfos, it's not really about the result of the shade that is produced. For Tosfos, it is about the intrinsic measurements of the sky. So if I am on a ladder, Tosfos says, and I am looking at that sky, and it's 50-50 up close, that's good. Because we said Paretz Ka'omed is kosher. 50-50 is kosher, according to Rav Papa. And he doesn't contradict himself. What does it mean that if I am below, if I'm mitachatz, I have 50-50, that's not good enough? What that means, milmata, that's not good enough? That means if I'm standing on ground level and I look up and it looks like it's 50-50 from my ground level, you should know that it's actually smaller. You actually have less than 50-50. Because when you stand further away from objects, apparently the optical illusion is that it looks like 50-50, but it's not really 50-50. This is what it says. Tosa says, if you're standing on ground level, and you're looking up the and it looks like it's 50-50 from down below. Kasula. Why is it disqualified? The airspace looks smaller from when you are below, but in reality, there is more airspace. So if it looks like 50-50 from ground level, you should know it's actually more air than you think there is. But the fundamental difference between Rashi and Tosfos reading the Gemara is that for Rashi, the schach is a means to determining how much shade I get. For Tosfos, yes, the schach is meant to produce shade, but the way we assess its validity is not by looking at the result of the shade on the ground or the lack thereof, but by looking at the literal measurements of the schach. And Toby, even in a case where maybe there is more sunlight in the end of the day, that doesn't matter because it's a din of a mechitza. We use the same principles like in Erevin. If you have 50-50 parts ka'omed, it is kosher. This Tosfos, I believe, was the first or one of the first shiurim when I learned Sukkah in high school. This Tosfos was one of the first ones. It was funny, right? We started the first parak, we turned directly to Chaf Beis and the base here and learned this Tosfos. So because you can imagine, the Gemara literally references our Mishnah. So you can't learn the first Mishnah if you're learning Be'iyah without referencing this Gemara over here. So, all right, we just did day one of Shir. Very good.
Can't believe high school kids could understand this stuff.
I'm sure Yechiel's is doing
I'm
this.
sure he can. I can't believe any high school kids can understand this stuff.
So, all right. Let's go back to the Gemara and get to the Mishnah. Another really important Gemara. I'll have to, I guess my grandfather might be busy tonight, but this was a point that he brought up. My grandfather mentioned, do you need to see the stars through your schach in order to make sure it's kosher? Is a schach that's so thick that you can't see the stars that invalidate the sukkah? So I may have given too quick of an answer the other time he raised it, but there's a little bit more to the story. Let's see the Gemara. So it said in the Mishnah, that if your schach is very thick that you can't see the stars, it's still kosher. And we have a brisa that elaborates on this a little bit. Okay, that I know so far. If the schach is so thick like a roof of a house that I can't see the stars, it's still kosher. Okay. But let's say I can't see the stars of the sun. What are the stars of the sun? Is a star? Rashi explains Zerhu Reichama. I believe it's referring to beams of light. In fact, I'm curious if that's how ArtScroll renders it.
Rays of the sun.
Rays of the sun, beams of light. Okay, yeah, same thing. So that's what Rashi says. There's different readings. I think Rambam says that they refer to the Kochanim Gedolim at nighttime, the really big stars. But we go with Rashi, which is the standard reading, which it refers to the beams of light. Let's say there is so much schach that even during the daytime, not even a ray of sunlight can penetrate the schach. Absolutely shut out. Is it still a kosher sukkah? Beishamai posts, and Beishamai says that's a step too far. You may not need to see the stars, but you need at least a ray of light to crack through. Whereas Beis Hillel mashkirin, Beis Hillel says it would be kosher nonetheless. Now, let me pause for a moment. I have a question for you. Is this Gemara telling us what to do lichatchila or b'diavad? If we look at the language, at the formulation of the Gemara, it's not actually instructing us what to do. It's saying if the schach is too thick, it's kosher. That is a formulation of b'diavad, post facto, saying if you accidentally made it so thick that no beams of light can get through, Beis Hillel says that's fine. I now bring to you, I should do this more often, my handy dandy Shulchan Aruch, and I'll tell you what the Shulchan Aruch actually paskins. The Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Reish Lamed Aleph, Sif Gimel paskins based on the Torah, etc. Ideally, the schach should be light enough that you'd be able to see the large stars through it. However, that's lichatchila. That's if you are initially designing your sukkah and your schach, that's what you should plan for. B'diavad, haisa ma'uva kamin bais, if it's thick like the roof of a house. Even though the stars cannot be seen through it, it will be kosher, just like Beis Hillel paskins. Now, the Taz explains as follows. I'm not going to take you down the whole rabbit hole. I had some fun learning it over Shabbos, and the Shabbos, every time I learned something over Shabbos, I didn't have to, after Shabbos, underline everything. Let me take you on a quick tour of the Mefarshim on the page. The Taz comments on the Magen Avraham, on the Shulchan Aruch, which it really is more of a comment on the Beis Yosef in the Torah. The Torah actually says it should be, let me pull up the Lashon of the Torah. That's a nice thing. I got the Torah Shulchan Aruch, so I can flip between them. So the Torah says you should really make your sukkah that it's not so thick to the extent that you could see A, kochavim, the stars, and B, nitzotzei hashemesh, the rays of light. So the question is, why did the Torah have to say both? It leads the Beis Yosef to say that's really the same shear, but many Mefarshim assume that it is easier to see rays of light cracking through the schach than to see entire stars through the schach. Yet the Torah seems to conflate them into a single measurement, which is what the Beis Yosef assumes. The Taz, again, who am I to judge between the Taz and Beis Yosef? But this, I found this to be a little bit more satisfying personally. The Taz says, what the Torah is saying is, you have to really put a lot of art scroll in between over here. Ideally, the schach should be just light enough that you can see stars through it at nighttime. And b'diavad, and then that's one way. The chiddush that you should even go so far to that extreme. And then the chiddush goes the other way. But let's say you didn't do it. Even if you can't see the nitzotzei shemesh, it would be kosher b'diavad, even if you can't see the rays of the sun. All that is to say is that there's a whole machlokes. You see, it's very clear from our Gemara what is true b'diavad. Beis Hillel says b'diavad, if it's completely shut out, it's kosher. But many argue, what is the mandate lichatchila? How far do I have to go? Though, one last little detail. What if it's so thick, not just that a ray of sunlight can't pierce it, but even rain can't get in? Remember, this might remind us of one of the first Tosasim we saw on Beis and Aleph. What if it's so thick that even rain can't penetrate through the sky? That's even more. So the Magen Avraham quotes the Levush, who says that if rain can't get through, it is not kosher. Now, why is that so significant? So one idea is that maybe that's just too much like Gezeres Tikra. It's too much like a real roof of a house. You'd say, what's the difference between my sukkah and my house already? It's the same thing. Though I saw in the Pri Megadim here, the Pri Megadim, he might be quoting someone else. I have to look more carefully. He says, Afshir dai b'chol sukkah b'makom echad sagi, as long as there's even just a little bit of the sukkah that you can see through, that's okay. Sheyiskor mi bar elios gar ba'aretz, as it says, Yoreach u'kochav ashir konenes. So maybe some would hold that even after taking this whole Gemara into account, maybe not your entire schach needs to be thin enough that you can see the stars anywhere, but at somewhere in your schach, it should be thin enough that you can see the stars. Why? Because one of the reasons of the sukkah is to remember that God shielded us when we were in the desert, and we're supposed to remember who's in charge of the world. And so when you are in your sukkah, there needs to be at least some kind of hole in there so you could peer up and you can remember that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu who is protecting. So that's an argument, again, against even what seems to be the final psak in the Gemara. All I have to say once more that I made it sound much more simple than it actually is. This is why we learn Torah, because then we we challenge those assumptions. I assume that it was just a very open shut Mishnah and Gemara, that your Sukkah can be as thick as possible. That might be true b'diavad. Lecharchila, though, that's one is supposed to strive to see the stars, or at very least the beams of light through their Sukkah. Okay, that was a short little piece of Gemara, but a lot of worthwhile exposition, because I feel like seeing the stars through your stock is one of like the big questions people point out. You go to like a guest sukkah or something, you look up like, oh no, it's kosher. I can't see this the stars through here. Like, why do we even accept this invitation? Right? So now you know the halakha. Okay. On to the next mission, my friends. On Baal Chabes Mabes. Right? This one is if you've ever learned Sukkah, chances are if there's a Mishnah you remember, this is one of them. It's I remember as a kid when we learned Mishnayos, you got like the picture book ones. It's like a Dr. Seuss book. So imagine you build a sukkah on top of a wagon, over Rosh Hashanah, or in a boat. Sheira, it's kosher. But Ola b'Yom Tov, you could even go onto it on Yom Tov. Now, what's the chiddush? The chiddush is to contrast with the next line in the Mishnah. Barosha Elon, but if you build a sukkah tree house, Ola Gabi Gamal, right? This is the top part where it starts feeling very Dr. Seuss. Or you build it on a camel, so then it is kishera. You could build a sukkah on a camel. The ain't Olam Yom Tov, but you're not allowed to ascend on it on Yom Tov, right? For the same reason you can't go on any animal on Yom Tov or any tree on Shabbos and Yom Tov, right? Because you're gonna pull a branch off and use it as a whip. Okay. So in the next case here, again, we'll just do this outside. There's a little bit of machlokas Rashi Tosos. We're going to talk about using a tree to build a sukkah. There's two ways to imagine it. Either the tree is serving as like ground level a little bit, and you're building like a wall on top of the tree, or as Tosos understands it, the tree is forming one of the walls. So think of it like, you have like a what do you call it? Like a hedge of bush trim there, using it as a wall of your sukkah. So if two walls are from the tree and one wall was artificially made, or two is made by you and one is just natural from the tree, it's a kosher sukkah, but you can't use it on Yom Tov, so not too helpful of a sukkah. Use on Chol Moed. However, if three of the walls, right, 3 walls makes a kosher sukkah, was made by man, but one was made by, and one is formed by the tree. Then you can use such a sukkah. Why? Zahaklal, going on to Chav Gimel and Aleph. Because since a sukkah only needs 3 walls, we can disregard the 4th wall, and it's still a kosher one, absent the tree. Therefore, you can use it on Yom Tov because it doesn't have a din of a tree house. Excuse me. All right.
Rabbi, I don't understand why it's okay to go in a wagon or a ship? I mean, we wouldn't go in a wagon or a ship on Yom Tov now.
Yes.
It might move. I mean, or is the assumption that it's fixed to the ground, or?
Yeah, so we're going to have a case just in a moment, but you're right. In general, there is a gezerah. If one wants to go on a cruise, or back in the day, on cruises for fun, people went on merchant ships. So in merchant ships, right, you're not supposed to go on 3 days before Shabbos. Since Machlokas, the Shabbos included in those 3 days. So is it Wednesday or is it Thursday through Shabbos? So we're going to see in just a moment. I think the case over here in the Gemara is going to presuppose that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Gamliel were already on the ship. Let me just glance at Rashi. Yeah, I think the idea is that you're already on there, and that's why it would be okay. All right, so here's a story in the Gemara about 2 rabbis on a ship with a sukkah. Money, Masisan. So who is the Tana of our Mishnah? Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva, the Tanya. Post to Roshat Svina. Rabbi Gamliel Posa, Rabbi Akiva Machshir. So it's a machlokas Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the Tana of our Mishnah who says you can use a sukkah that's on a boat. Rabbi Gamliel says no, you can't. Ma'aser Gamliel Rabbi Akiva. Sheyubayin bisfina. that they were traveling on a boat together. What do you know? The two rabbis who argue about whether you make a sukkah on a boat were traveling on a boat on Sukkot, as Hashgacha Pratis would have it. Amar Rabbi, or maybe that's Dafka when they had their machlokas, because of the circumstances, as we'll see. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Va'asa Sukkah Barosh Asvina. So Rabbi Akiva got up, and I guess prior to Yom Tov, he set up his sukkah, right, on Erev Yom Tov, he sets up his sukkah on the boat. Lamachar, the next day when it's Yom Tov, Nishba Ruach Akarasa, a wind came and blew away his sukkah. Poor guy. Amar Gamliel, Akiva, Heicha Sukkasecha. Where's your sukkah now? Right? It's almost like it reminds me of like Goliath when he says to David, where's your God now? It's like, where's your sukkah now, Rabbi Akiva? Now, what is fundamentally wrong about a sukkah on a boat according to Rabbi Gamliel? Well, that you'll have to tune in for next week on the second sukkah. I gave you a brief answer. Oh, we can do it next week, sure. I don't want to leave you. Toby, you don't want me to leave you in suspense?
Whatever everybody else wants.
Well, okay, we'll do one more piece. Why not? Why not? A little more tone. Amar Abai. So here's the rationale for their machlokas. I won't leave you on the cliffhanger. So in general, just a note for background, a sukkah on land, a standard sukkah, needs to be able to withstand a typical wind. Okay? If a hurricane comes and blows it down, that's not a deficiency in the sukkah. If a sukkah can't withstand standard winds, even if there's no wind blowing at the time, that's an inherent deficiency in its status as a kosher sukkah. But the question is going to be is, well, what about wind that blows at sea? How do we, that's usually more difficult to deal with. So Amar Abai, everyone agrees. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva both agree that if the sukkah cannot withstand regular wind on land, it is not a kosher sukkah. And if it's able to withstand a non-standard wind on dry land, everyone agrees that is very sturdy sukkah, which is also kosher. What is their dispute limited to? It's within this particular scope. Ki pligi lama baruch mitsuya de abasha. Change the gears a little bit. Baruch mitsuya diyam. You might I have a different gears for my Gemara, but the editors fix it up a little bit, which makes a little bit more sense, I think. That goes to Yunim, quoting from Tosis, Ron, and others, which is, let's say it could withstand a typical wind on land, but it is not able to withstand typical wind at sea. Rabbi Gamliel savar sukkah diras keva be'inan, according to Rabbi Gamliel, a sukkah has to be a firm, established structure. If it can't withstand the wind of the sea, it's not kosher. Rabbi Akiva savar sukkah diras arai be'inan, whereas Rabbi Akiva says, where do we assess a sukkah's legitimacy? If we were to assume it was standing on land, can it withstand the wind on land? If yes, it's a kosher sukkah, because Rabbi Akiva only requires a diras arai. So that is basically their machlokas. Rabbi Gamliel has a higher standard. He is part of that school of thought of Tanaim, who think a sukkah is a diras keva, a firm, established structure, where a robust structure, whereas Rabbi Akiva is of the school of thought that says a sukkah is a diras arai, a more temporary, flimsy kind of structure. Not too flimsy, but flimsy enough that a sea wind could blow it off. And that's the basis of their machlokas. All right. And I don't think we go any further. Otherwise, we'd have not much to learn next week. So we'll end there at the 2 dots. All right. Wishing everyone a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you.
God willing, good news.
Amen. Amen.